I have not been religious for a long time. But the events I'm talking about today took place at a very different time for me, when I was religious. Very religious. While I am no longer that person, I think understanding the me that was can be helpful in defining the me that I've become. So, pretentiousness aside, let's dig in. I spent my freshman year of high school in Fortuna, California. While we did move several times during the year, I was able to stay in the same school, which made for a nice change. At the time, I felt drawn in two different directions. On the one hand, I got involved in the drama club and in choir. Now, admittedly, choir I mostly joined just because the group was going to LA at the end of the year. I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, so I cheated and just got away with mouthing the words and pretending to sing. I had a few good acquaintances, but as usual, stayed a bit distant, as I knew I would only be moving again sooner or later. I have to admit, however, that I felt a certain kinship with some of the other kids, especially in the drama club, something I wouldn't understand until years later. On the other hand, I was having something of a religious revival. The pastor at our local church took me under his wing, in part because he could see I didn't have any good male role models at home, and also to an extent because my religious fervor was actually annoying the rest of the kids my age, and he wanted to give me an outlet for that, while making sure I didn't drive everyone else off. I like to think, however, that he saw some potential in me, and perhaps felt I might be interested in the ministry myself in the future. So he and I would meet each Saturday to work through a youth group curriculum that he had found, with the idea that if I liked it and saw value, he could then roll it out to the rest of the youth group later. Between my freshman and sophomore school years, I went away to church camp for a week, and when I came back, the family was more or less packed up and ready to move again. I had of course expected the day would come sooner or later, but it did still catch me by surprise. So picture this. Everything had been fine when I left a week earlier. That day, my pastor picked me up at the church camp and drove me home about 30 or 40 miles. We pulled up to find a moving van out front and everyone loading things in. Long story short, there had been some drama while I was away, with my mother's boyfriend at the time, later her fourth husband, his kids, and his not-quite ex-wife. My mother and her boyfriend decided to put some space between them and that situation by moving out of state. We left for Nevada the next day. It became a family joke that it was a good thing that I hadn't got home a day late or I would have just found an empty house. Needless to say, my 15-year-old self did not find it very funny. My sister was 4 years older than me and decided it was time that she go out on her own, so she did not move with us. It was 1981. My family had moved into a small farming community in Nevada. I still had, as you can see, very bad, embarrassing 70s hair. For the record, if you get a chuckle out of the picture, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. When I say that this was a small town, that may be an understatement. I would guess the town had about 200 residents, and the high school and junior high combined had about 30 students total. When I found out that most of the inhabitants of this small town were Mormons, I decided that God had sent me here to convert these heathen Mormons to Christianity. Now, I didn't know a thing about Mormons, not even that the formal name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But to a burgeoning religious zealot like myself, facts didn't really matter much. A few days into the school year, some of the other students invited me to a breakfast at their church before school. They explained that they went to something called seminary every morning, but on this particular day it was just a breakfast, so no pressure, but I was more than welcome to join them. Now, I'm not a morning person, at all, but I felt this was a great way to get to know these people better. All the better to help convert them to Christianity, of course, so I agreed to go. They, of course, invited me back the next day. And as the perpetually chubby kid, I felt embarrassed to have just gone for the food and then not to go back. So I told myself I would go for just one day and then quit. So I went the next day. The program was run at that time by a somewhat older couple, JL and Dawn. They were genuinely some of the nicest, sweetest people I had ever known. They very helpfully found a set of the student books for me, put my name on them, and did everything they could to make me feel welcome. They had gone to all of that trouble for me, so I couldn't go for just one day. I told myself I would finish the week out and then quit. I found the class very interesting, however, as that year it was talking about church history, and I love any kind of history. The class covered how the church was formed and about the basic beliefs and the like, so I decided to go for one more week and then quit. But I never quite got around to quitting. I always managed to find another excuse to continue attending. I suppose, in part, there was the fact that I was actually getting to know people. I was coming as close as I had ever been to having actual friends, but I also genuinely found the class interesting. I was amazed at just how much made sense to me. Fast forward a couple of months, late October I think, and after more drama, my mother and her boyfriend decided to move again. This time to another, somewhat larger town about 30 to 40 miles away that might have better job opportunities for him. And I didn't want to go. I told my mother that I wanted to stay. I needed to. I needed that stability. There was a single mother in town, Mormon like most, who took in foster children. After several conversations, she agreed to take me in as well for the rest of the school year. My father would send my child support to her instead of my mother, and my mother would send what money she could. Now, as I mentioned last time, my mother was very hurt. My sister had not moved to Nevada with us. My brother was bouncing between living with her and living with my dad, although he was living with her at this moment. And now, her youngest, me, was saying he couldn't continue with this life. Every parent knows, of course, that the day will come when their children move away. For my mother, however, it ended up that we all left within about 8 months, since my brother also decided to stay in the next town when Mom moved on again. Now back to me in that small Mormon town. As coincidence would have it, once I had lived with the Mormon family, the Mormon missionaries began dropping by every week or two for dinner. Strange how that works. While they were there anyway, would I mind if they went through their presentations, called the missionary discussions? Sure, I said. Why not? So, over a few months, we worked through those discussions. So I was going to seminary each morning before school, going to church with the family each Sunday, and the missionaries would come by every 1 to 2 weeks. At the end of the 7th discussion, I was asked and agreed to be baptized. I like to say, half jokingly, that they ganged up on me. The kids at school who welcomed me into their group and invited me to that breakfast and then to seminary. The family I moved in with. The general kindness and friendliness of the people of the town. The missionaries and their efforts, etc. They all ganged up on me and won. My plan to somehow save them all from Mormonism did not quite work out. I was a juvenile at the time, so of course I needed parental approval. That weekend, I traveled to visit my mom, who's still living in that nearby town. She wasn't at home when I arrived, but was out at a nearby laundromat. So I walked over and helped her with laundry. When done, we loaded the clothes in the car and started to head back. With my usual great timing, I gave her my news and made my request, right as we pulled out of the parking lot. She slammed on the car brakes in shock. Luckily, oncoming traffic was able to stop, or my story might have ended a lot earlier. We spent the next hour or so just driving around, aimlessly more or less, and talking. In the end, she said she didn't necessarily agree with my decision, but it was clear it was my decision and I wasn't being forced or tricked into it. She gave her consent, and so, in the winter of 1982, I became a Mormon. Mormonism remained an active part of my life for the next 8 to 10 years. As a Mormon, I served a 2-year mission for the church. I came home and got married. We had a beautiful daughter, who has now become a beautiful and amazing woman. Even after I, more or less, left the church, it continued to impact my worldview, my politics, my self-image, and more, for years, if not decades. But all that time, that other feeling had always been there, that sense that so many people have of not quite fitting in, of being the square peg trying to fit in a round hole, of having not quite the same interests or focus as the people my age I knew. All this made more pronounced, and yet somehow more obscure, by the unstable childhood and having withdrawn so far into myself. While I wanted to belong somewhere, to be a good husband, a good father, a good Mormon, I always knew that something was not quite right. And that is where we'll pick up next time.